So 15 years ago, when the Lord first started to call Tiffany and I to church planting, he did so by convincing us that the greatest way that the kingdom of God advances on the earth is through church planting. And so we knew we wanted to be a part of that. And then he called us to Vermont. We planted a couple times in Vermont. 7 years ago when we started New King, I wasn't sure if we would ever do it again. I thought, it's possible the Lord's called us to stay here and just try to raise people up and send them out to plant from here. But I always, in the back of my mind, I wondered, if the Lord would have us do it again.
When the Lord initially called us to church planting, we thought that he was calling us to sequential church planting, similar to what Paul did in the book of Acts, where he would go plant a church, raise up leaders, leave the church with them, and then go and plant another church. And that's really what we thought God was calling us to. But then when we came to Burlington, we really thought, oh, this is a place where we can kind of settle down a little bit and we can raise up leaders and send them out from here. And that might be the most effective thing for kingdom growth. And I think that was the most effective thing for kingdom growth for the last 8 years.
As New King has become more mature and more stabilized as a church is growing up, we started to ask that question again, are we where we're impacting the kingdom of God the most that we possibly can? Or is there some other way that we could be leveraging our lives to advance his kingdom? Most years, at the end of the year, we would pray and ask the Lord if he might want us to do it again, and we would surrender afresh and just put our yes on the table and say, Lord, if you want us to go, we will go.
Every year we prayed that, and every year it kind of seemed like the Lord was just saying, yes, continue in this path. You're where I want you, you're doing what I want you to do. And then I remember very specifically last year at the Family of Churches conference, Camden was leading us in a time of prayer, and we were praying about New King's next church planter. That was kind of the first time that thought had entered my mind, here we are as a church. We want to be ascending church. We are ascending church. We want to be a kingdom-minded church. And we're praying for the next church planter and his family. Could that possibly be us?
Church planting is our greatest contribution. It feels like that's the thing that God has made us for, built our family for, that church planting is the best way that we can leverage our lives for the sake of his kingdom. And also, we built New King intentionally to be a church planting church and to raise up people to send out from there. And so it was always in the back of our minds that could one day be us. Over this past year, but especially over the last few months, I guess, we've become convinced that the Lord is, in fact, sending us again. We began to just gather information and talk to people, seek godly counsel. I shared that with the other pastors at New King. We talked to people that have known us for a really long time and that have been a source of wise counsel for us, and just started to share that this was something that we felt like God was doing. And the feedback that we got was overwhelmingly that people could see us doing this again. So we started to sort of just gather information. I started to do research, looking into different places where there might be a need for church planting. But all the while, Tiffany and I knew, we didn't pick Vermont when we came here. God clearly led us to Vermont. And we weren't going to pick the place that we planted this time around either.
We'd come to this place where we were confident that God was calling us to plant another church. We didn't know when, we didn't know where. And he had been really setting aside a specific time to fast and pray, to just hear from the Lord, get direction.
Then in December, there was this day when I woke up and I just had this feeling like this weight upon me, like I need to know something. I need to know one way or the other if we're supposed to be going out to plant in the near future, or if this is something that I need to lay aside at least for a season so that I can focus. And so I just decided to spend the first half of the day in prayer and seeking the Lord and begging him to give me something, like either tell me don't worry about this for now, or give me some direction. And somewhere along the lines I prayed and said, Lord, would you tell me something before the sun goes down? At 3:15 I got a phone call from Benji Lavender, who's the missions pastor at Lakewood Baptist Church in Gainesville. It's a partner church of ours. And he called and he said, hey, I have a proposition for you, something I want to run by you. And he went on to tell me that Lakewood has this vision, this desire to plant churches in Atlanta. And there's this great need in Atlanta. What if you came here to Lakewood for a year or so to prepare? What if you came here and you worked on raising support, on building a team, on building out a vision. You worked on, exploring the different communities in Atlanta and see where God's calling. And then we send you out from here and you plant in Atlanta. I remember, along the way we shared stuff with our kids that we're praying about these things. And I remember one day Sam coming to me and saying, hey Dad, what is the South on the table, or like should we not even pray about that? And I just remember kind of being taken aback, like well, I mean, everything is on the table as long as God is leading. I really don't think that that's where God would call us.
Honestly, Atlanta had never been on our radar at all. And so Ben gets this call. Providentially, we have a date already planned for that night. We're sitting there having dinner and he starts kind of relaying this proposition. I
really expected for her to kind of think the same thing that I thought, which was, that's just not for us, But instead, she asked a lot of really good questions and was intrigued by this in more ways than I was.
I think, had that happened earlier in the year, I would have completely dismissed it. But I think my heart was in just a very tender place. And I mean, the Lord knew. I just was willing to hear it and pray about it and consider it as a real possibility.
So we began to pray every day, and that week, each day that we prayed, we would come back together and talk about it.
After about a week, Ben and I were in our room, we were talking one morning.
Tiffany and I had our quiet time that morning. We were having a conversation afterward, and I started to just share with Tiffany some thoughts that I was having. Okay, if we did this, here's what it would look like.
It's just like this vision bubbling up out of him.
And I started to just share some specific things that were on my mind, and tears welled up in her eyes.
I just start crying and he asked me,
what's wrong? What did I say? And she says,
nothing is wrong, but you have vision. He just laid out this full vision for a church in Atlanta.
As soon as she said it, I teared up. And I immediately in that moment felt like I heard the Lord say to me, you have a Nehemiah call. So I said, let's read Nehemiah. So I opened up to Nehemiah. I start reading it and I can't stop crying. And Tiffany's crying and I'm crying, and I'm considering how here's this guy who's like, he's away from home.
Truly, the Lord was giving us his heart for Atlanta and his burden for Atlanta. And honestly, it felt very similar to when God gave us his burden for New England.
It says something like, these are your people that you've redeemed, that you've called by name. And I couldn't even get the words out, and I just started to sob. And we surrendered right then and there. We told the Lord that we would go.
I'm just excited that he is calling us into a work that he wants to do in Atlanta, and that we're going to get to be a part of it. That's exactly what he did when he called us to Vermont. He was already stirring people here, bringing people to himself, and we just entered into that with him. And I am really excited to get to do that again.
So we learned that over the last few decades, the percentage of evangelicals has been dropping rapidly. It put within us an excitement that God is planning to do something special there. And we believe that God is just calling us to be one small part of what he wants to do there. In the same way that when he called us to Vermont, he had called so many others at the same time. There was this bigger work that God was doing in the state. And it's a surprising calling. We thought for sure we'd be going to maybe even overseas, but somewhere where there was very little in the way of church planting. But God has surprised us, very clearly calling us back to Atlanta. I've thought about what I would want to say to New King a lot, and I don't know how to even summarize it or put it into words. I think leaving New King is going to be hard. But obeying the Lord is always worth it.
Unfortunately, my vocabulary and my communication skills fail me in trying to just express how deeply I love New King and the people at New King. The Lord is looking for living proof of a living faith in a living God. And New King is that.
In our going, I hope that it can be fuel for people. That it's an opportunity for every single person to take a look at their own life and say, is my yes on the table to do whatever it is that the Lord is calling me to do, whether that's to be the best sender that I can be for church planting, or the best goer that I can be wherever he calls me and whatever he calls me to.
I hope and pray that New King can send us out with shouts of joy in knowing that this is just the next thing that God is asking New King to do.
There will be some hard things about us leaving, but it will be worth it in the end because God's the one who's behind it. He aims to do something big in Atlanta, but he also still has great things in store for New King.